The morning air was cold, sharp enough to sting my cheeks, and the streets outside St. Michael's Cathedral were eerily quiet, save for the few mourners arriving in their black suits and subdued whispers. I stood on the curb in my simple black dress, clutching my small handbag, feeling every eye that glanced my way. Some curious, some judgmental. My heart pounded, not from guilt or shame, but from disbelief. My own mother, Eleanor Hayes, stood like a sentinel at the cathedral's grand entrance, her Chanel suit impeccably tailored, her heels clicking against the stone as she planted herself firmly in the doorway. She wasn't just dressed for the funeral, she was dressed to dominate, to control the narrative, and, most devastatingly, to exclude me. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed directly at me, and her voice, cold and unwavering, carried through the crisp morning air. Veronica is dead to this family, too. Just like her father. She's not welcome here. I froze, unable to move, unable to respond. The woman I had spent 3 years caring for, watching her every move while she pursued luxury vacations and European shopping sprees, had just declared me unworthy of attending my own father's funeral. A funeral I had planned, organized, and paid for with every penny of my savings. Around me, the world seemed to blur. The black and white tones of the cathedral's stone facade mirrored the stark contrast between my mother's show of wealth and my own modest appearance, the empty streets around me emphasizing my isolation. I took a slow breath, steadying myself, while my mind raced, trying to reconcile the absurdity of the moment. From across the street, I could see the gleam of luxury cars pulling into the lot, my siblings arriving in their symbols of excess. Jonathan, my older brother, emerged from a white Ferrari, adjusting his custom-tailored suit and checking his expensive watch. As if time itself was a currency he had mastered, a pastel pink Tesla followed, Prudence filming her arrival live for her thousands of followers. Her words dripping with performative grief. Hey, beautiful souls, about to say goodbye to Daddy. Remember, grief is just love with nowhere to go. Use code PRUDENCE20 for my exclusive grief healing essential oils. Meanwhile, I remained outside, invisible to the family that once claimed to love me. The lone figure in black against the cold stone of the cathedral. My gaze returned to Mom, whose expression was one of practiced control. She guided my siblings past the crowd of mourners, tears appearing as if on cue, and loudly declared their roles in the family legacy. Jonathan will be taking over your father's construction business, of course. And Prudence, darling, the rental properties will set you up perfectly for your influence career. Her performance was flawless, and yet it was grotesque in its theatricality. Every lie, every act of manipulation was on full display. My heart sank as I watched Dad's loyal employees exchange incredulous glances, their disbelief echoing my own. Miguel, his foreman of decades, caught my eye and mouthed, "This isn't right." Even as my chest tightened with a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief, a small signal from across the street caught my attention. Our family lawyer, Mr. Harrison, sat in a dark car, his eyes meeting mine through the windshield. He tapped his watch twice, a subtle gesture I didn't understand at the moment, but one that promised something unseen, something that would tip the scales in a way I could not yet comprehend. I allowed myself a small nod in return, masking the tumult of emotions brewing inside me. The security guards, off-duty officers hired by Mom, approached with hesitant professionalism. "Ma'am, we're very sorry, but we've been paid to escort you off the property." one whispered. I offered a tight, calm smile. I understand. You're just doing your job. I stepped away from the entrance, each footfall deliberate, my dignity intact even as humiliation threatened to claw at me. I walked toward my 10-year-old Honda Civic, a humble reminder of the sacrifices I had made while everyone else enriched themselves. And yet, even in that moment of public shaming and exclusion, there was an edge of anticipation. I could feel it in the air. The story was far from over. From across the street, I watched the spectacle unfold, my mother rewriting reality in real time, my siblings playing their parts, and the mourners looking on with stunned curiosity. The absurdity of it all was almost cinematic, yet it was painfully real. I took a slow breath, grounding myself and prepared for what was coming next, knowing that the truth had a way of revealing itself, and that the cleverest plans are often hidden behind moments of chaos and humiliation. And for those of you watching right now, maybe with your morning coffee or a late-night tea in hand, I want you to pause and imagine yourself in my shoes for just a moment. If you're ready to see how a story of betrayal, loyalty, and ultimate justice unfolds, go ahead and hit that like button and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. Because what happens next, it's going to be unbelievable, and I promise you won't see it coming. I had spent most of my adult life moving at the speed of ambition. At 32, I was Veronica Hayes, a senior marketing executive at a Fortune 500 company, living in a sleek downtown loft, traveling the world for conferences, building campaigns that were seen by millions, and managing a life that I had meticulously crafted on my own terms. I had everything I thought I wanted: freedom, financial independence, recognition. I could make a decision and watch it take shape, unhindered by the chaos of family drama or expectation. My apartment overlooked the city skyline, my calendar was packed with meetings and flights, and I had spent years learning to rely on myself entirely. I was proud of the life I had built, but life, as it often does, has a way of reminding you that control is always temporary. It started with a phone call on an ordinary Tuesday. My father, Thomas Hayes, had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. He didn't sugarcoat it. There was no hope hidden in euphemisms, no optimism to cushion the blow. The words hit me like a physical force, leaving me breathless. Stage 4, terminal, time running out. It was a call that changed everything, though on the surface, nothing looked different. It was just a Tuesday, with the hum of traffic in the background and the distant clatter of construction outside my loft window. Ordinary, except for the fact that it shattered my world. Without hesitation, I sold my schedule, my life on autopilot, and moved back into the house I had grown up in. A house that held both comfort and pain, nostalgia and tension. I converted the dining room into a makeshift medical station, learning to administer IV medications, giving injections, changing bedpans, and holding my father's hand through 37 excruciating rounds of chemotherapy. Every day blurred into the next, with sleepless nights spent monitoring his vitals, calculating dosages, and comforting him when the pain became unbearable. I became his nurse, his advocate, his companion, while my siblings and mother carried on with lives that seemed untouched by his suffering. My mother, Eleanor Hayes, spent her days redecorating the house, critiquing the paint on the walls, and planning elaborate European vacations she promised she would take once this whole thing was over. She treated my father's illness like an inconvenient home renovation project that was taking too long, brushing past his room without offering even a glass of water, complaining about the medical smell that lingered despite my efforts to clean and sanitize every corner. She had promised love in sickness and in health, yet her actions proved otherwise, and each day I felt the sting of that betrayal more keenly. Jonathan, my older brother, was halfway across the globe in Tokyo, chasing hedge fund targets and clients, barely lifting a finger to see his father. Prudence, my younger sister, was building her luxury wellness brand in Tulum, documenting every yoga pose and authentic life moment for her social media followers, paying more attention to the perfect Instagram light than to the health of the man who had given her everything. Meanwhile, I poured my savings into medications that insurance refused to cover, juggling bills and caregiving responsibilities in a relentless cycle. I often went 48 hours without sleep, my body and mind aching from exhaustion, but I never complained. It didn't matter that my career had been paused, my life rearranged. I knew the importance of being present for the one person who had been unwavering in his love for me. Some Sundays were the hardest, while I rested in a chair beside my father's bed, exhausted to the point of collapse. My mother would FaceTime Jonathan and Prudence, cooing about how much she missed her precious babies, celebrating their successes and consoling their supposed hardships. Jonathan needed a new Audemars Piguet for client meetings, she explained, and Prudence required a better camera for her Instagram posts about living authentically. She lavished them with money, gifts, and attention while I worked through the night, struggling to keep my father comfortable, watching the clock tick toward the end of his life. The injustice of it all, the casual disregard for the person who gave everything, was almost unbearable. I felt invisible, undervalued, and yet resolute. Through it all, I developed a rhythm of care, learning to anticipate my father's needs before he asked, holding his hand when he felt weak, and quietly fuming at the inequities around me. I watched my siblings and mother parade their convenience, their wealth, their self-interest, all while I carried the weight of mortality on my shoulders. Every pill I administered, every dinner I prepared, every night I stayed awake to monitor his pain was a silent testament to the loyalty I bore. I didn't do it for recognition, for inheritance, or for a pat on the back. I did it because love demanded action, and I had no choice but to rise to the occasion. By the time the final days came, my body was exhausted, my emotions stretched to the limit, but I was ready. I had given everything I could, and yet I sensed that the real battle was not just medical. It was familial. Watching my mother orchestrate appearances, my siblings prioritizing luxury over humanity, I realized that their greed and neglect had been documented, observed, and accounted for, though I didn't know it yet. Every late night, every financial sacrifice, every exhausted minute had been building toward something larger than grief or revenge. I only had to survive the moment, to witness the funeral, to see who truly cared and who had only cared about appearances. That's when I understood the stakes. This was bigger than my father's illness or my mother's cruelty. It was about loyalty versus entitlement, devotion versus self-interest, and ultimately about justice earned through perseverance and integrity rather than loud confrontation. And while I stood there outside the cathedral, invisible to the family who should have held me closest, I knew the story was far from over. The real chapter, the one that would decide who inherited more than just wealth, was about to begin, and it would reveal everything: who loved, who lied, and who would finally get what they deserved. The morning air had a brittle chill, the kind that made the edges of your skin feel raw and alive, and I stood across the street from St. Michael's Cathedral, every nerve in my body alert, every breath measured. The street was quiet. The sort of quiet that amplifies the sound of heels clicking against stone and muffled whispers from bystanders. I had expected sadness, maybe tears, perhaps even awkward glances or judgmental stares, but nothing could have prepared me for the spectacle my mother had orchestrated. Eleanor Hayes, my mother, had planted herself in front of the cathedral's massive oak doors as if she were guarding a fortress, her posture rigid, her face a mask of superiority. The Chanel suit she wore was perfect, every crease in place, every seam sharp, and the pair of pumps on her feet clicked like a metronome with each deliberate step she took. She didn't just walk, she claimed the space around her. She became the center of attention, and I, for the first time that morning, was rendered invisible. Her finger extended toward me, perfectly manicured, as if she were pointing at some distant offender rather than her own daughter. Her voice cut through the crisp morning air like a whip. Veronica is dead to this family too, just like her father. She's not welcome here. The words landed in my chest like a brick, and for a brief second I felt the world shift beneath me. Dead to this family, my own mother, who had raised me, who had carried me on her hip and whispered bedtime stories, had just uninvited me from my own father's funeral. It was surreal, almost cinematic in its cruelty, the kind of moment that belongs in a novel or a movie, not real life. I stood frozen, staring at her, trying to reconcile the woman who had shaped so many of my early memories with the tyrant who now publicly shamed me before dozens of onlookers. Two off-duty security officers, hired by my mother and clearly uncomfortable with their task, approached me. One whispered, "Ma'am, we're very sorry, but we've been paid to escort you off church property." Their hesitance only added fuel to the fire of humiliation. I met their eyes calmly, forced my posture into something dignified, and nodded. "I understand. You're just doing your job," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil twisting inside me. I turned slowly, deliberately toward my 10-year-old Honda Civic parked down the street, each step measured, controlled, as if I were rehearsing composure in front of an audience that was already judging me. My chest felt tight, my heart pounding, but I refused to crumble. I refused to give my mother or anyone else the satisfaction of witnessing my breakdown. Meanwhile, the absurd theater of my family's life continued to unfold. My older brother, Jonathan, pulled up in a pristine white Ferrari 8112 Superfast, the engine's purr echoing in the quiet street like an announcement of his arrival. He stepped out, adjusting his custom-tailored suit with precision, checking his expensive watch as if time itself was a commodity he alone could control. His face was painted with concern, a mask I knew well, a mask I had seen him wear for work presentations, for client meetings, for people who mattered less than his bank statements. Jonathan had not set foot in this house for nearly 2 years, not since he'd left for Hong Kong, claiming the financial markets needed his constant attention. Yet here he was, rolling in style, acting the part of the dutiful son, the grieving family member. A performance perfected over years of privilege and self-interest. Prudence, my younger sister, followed shortly after in her pastel pink Tesla, the kind that looked more like a prop for Instagram than a practical vehicle. She had her phone in hand, live streaming every second for her thousands of followers, narrating her grief with the precision of a social media strategist. "Hey, beautiful souls," she cooed into her camera, her tone saccharine and rehearsed, about to say goodbye to Daddy. Remember, grief is just love with nowhere to go. Use code PRUDENCE20 for my exclusive grief healing essential oils. She paused dramatically, framing her tear-streaked face and the cathedral doors in the perfect shot. I had spent sleepless nights at home, administering IVs, monitoring medications, holding Dad's hand through countless rounds of chemotherapy, and here she was monetizing grief with the same effortless charm she had perfected for brand sponsorships. The sheer absurdity of it made me want to laugh and cry at the same time, a cocktail of rage, heartbreak, and disbelief. I could see the crowd of mourners, friends, and distant relatives exchanging glances, their expressions a mix of confusion, pity, and curiosity. They whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads, some stealing glances at the unfolding spectacle. I noticed a few employees from my father's construction business, men who had worked alongside him for decades, standing stiffly near the entrance, their faces etched with disbelief. Miguel, Dad's longtime foreman, caught my eye and mouthed a single word. "This isn't right." His expression mirrored my own internal turmoil, but I could do nothing but nod in silent agreement, my hands gripping the straps of my bag. And then, across the street I saw him, Mr. Harrison, our family lawyer, sitting in his car. His dark suit and composed posture made him almost invisible if you weren't looking closely. But his eyes found mine. He tapped his watch twice, deliberate and subtle, a signal I didn't yet understand. Something was unfolding, something premeditated, something my father had orchestrated long before any of us knew it was possible. The sight of him sent a shiver through me, not of fear, but of anticipation. The tension between public humiliation and the promise of justice built inside me, a coiled spring waiting for release. I drew in a slow, controlled breath, forcing my mind to remain as sharp as my heartbeat was frantic. I cataloged every detail, the meticulous way my mother had positioned herself, the exact angles my siblings were holding themselves, the reactions of the bystanders, and even the subtle hints from Mr. Harrison. Each element was a note in a symphony of betrayal and manipulation that my father had likely predicted. I realized then that humiliation was temporary, but knowledge, preparation, and composure could turn the tables in ways no display of wealth or theatrics could match. My internal monologue ran fast, slicing through the chaos. Stay calm. Observe. Record every detail. This is bigger than a funeral. This is a test. Every gesture, every word, every eye movement counts. Remember what Dad always said, the truth always surfaces, even if it takes time. I allowed my face to remain neutral, my posture composed, letting the scene play out like a movie I was watching from a distance. I did not flinch, did not shout, did not confront. Instead, I cataloged, analyzed, and prepared for the inevitable reckoning. Even the security guards hesitated, unsure how to handle me. One whispered again, more nervously this time, "Ma'am, please, we don't want trouble." I offered a small, controlled smile, acknowledging their discomfort. "I understand," I said softly. "You're just doing your job." The simplicity of my response, the calm authority in my voice, contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding me. I was an island of composure in a storm of greed, performance, and cruelty. The absurdity of my siblings' behavior only added to the surrealness. Jonathan's concern was performative, his expensive Ferrari a silent announcement of wealth and distraction. Prudence's Instagram live stream with its staged tears and promotional commentary was grotesque in its brazenness. Meanwhile, my mother orchestrated the narrative of the day, guiding them past the crowd, pretending intimacy, projecting affection she had never shown in reality. She was performing grief with the skill of a seasoned actor, while I, the one who had sacrificed so much, remained a ghost in the scene, invisible yet entirely present. As I turned toward my car, ready to retreat across the street and observe from a safe distance, I allowed myself a moment to reflect. The humiliation, the betrayal, the absurd theater, these were not the end. They were merely the opening act in a story much larger than today's spectacle. My father had always been smarter than any of us gave him credit for, and the signs were there. The subtle glance from Mr. Harrison, the careful timing, the knowledge that every act of greed would be documented. I was calm, composed, intelligent, and fully aware that the tide was about to turn, and in that moment, as the wind cut through my coat and the cathedral bells rang faintly in the background, I realized that the story was no longer just about grief or loss. It was about loyalty, observation, preparation, and the quiet power of patience. The stage was set, the players had revealed their true colors, and I, the uninvited heiress, was ready to step into a role far more consequential than anyone had imagined. Every insult, every pointed finger, every staged tear would serve as the foundation for what was coming next. A reckoning that my father had orchestrated, and one I would execute with the same calm precision I had maintained while caring for him through the darkest days of his illness. This wasn't just humiliation. It was the beginning of the unveiling. The morning sun cast a pale, cold light across the city as I made my way to Mr. Harrison's office, the family lawyer who had always seemed more like a guardian of secrets than just a legal advisor. The glass building gleamed with professional sterility, the lobby empty save for the faint hum of air conditioning. Every step I took toward the elevator seemed amplified, echoing softly against the marble floors. I could feel my pulse quicken, not from nerves about the official will reading tomorrow, but from the anticipation of what Mr. Harrison had promised to show me. For 3 years, I had watched over my father with unrelenting dedication, sacrificing sleep, money, and career ambitions to care for him through the final chapters of his life. Now, finally, it seemed as though the truth was about to surface. A truth I had only glimpsed in fleeting moments, glimpses of my mother's indifference, Jonathan's absence, and Prudence's superficial concern. Harrison greeted me with a measured nod, his eyes dark behind thick-rimmed glasses, exuding calm authority. "Veronica," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "before the official will reading, your father wanted you to see some things that would explain why the documents signed 2 weeks ago are more than just legalese. They're a testament to foresight, to intelligence, and to love." He gestured toward the conference room, where a large laptop rested on the table, its screen black but alive with the promise of revelation. Around it were neatly stacked folders, each labeled in perfect handwriting, each containing documents that would tell a story I had only suspected, but had never fully understood. I followed him, every step heavy with anticipation. As I entered, the room seemed charged, almost vibrating with tension. The faint scent of polished wood mixed with the sterile tang of air conditioning, creating a surreal atmosphere that made my pulse thrum with nervous energy. Harrison gestured for me to sit, and I obeyed, my hands clutching the edge of the table, my mind racing. He pressed play on the laptop, and the first video appeared, grainy, yet unmistakably real. Jonathan, my older brother, the golden child, the one who had spent the past 2 years in Tokyo chasing hedge fund deals and flaunting his wealth. There he was, at 3 a.m, slipping quietly into Dad's office. A flashlight in one hand, a camera in the other, rifling through stacks of documents. Every movement was furtive, calculated, and utterly devoid of hesitation. Harrison's voice cut through the silence. Your father anticipated this. He knew Jonathan might think himself clever, that he could manipulate circumstances for personal gain. But he documented it. Every step, every gesture, every illegal intention was caught on camera. My stomach twisted as I watched Jonathan's face illuminated in the dim light, the shadows emphasizing the greed etched into his features. For years, he had been praised for ambition and charm, while I had watched from a distance, knowing that his actions often lacked morality. Yet seeing it laid bare, in such stark reality, ignited a mix of rage, disappointment, and sorrow. Before I could process the images, Harrison clicked the next video. Prudence. My younger sister, the one whose Instagram feed I had scrolled past countless times, curated with hashtags about authentic living and self-care. There she was, slipping into Dad's room with practiced ease, opening a drawer and taking pills from his prescription bottle. Not a single hesitation, not a glance toward his empty bed, not a thought of care or concern, just a calculated act of theft. Harrison didn't rush the playback. He let each second stretch, forcing me to absorb every motion, every detail, every betrayal. Your father suspected this as well, he said, voice low, almost reverential. He knew Prudence would test the limits, that her obsession with appearance would outweigh her sense of duty or compassion. This isn't just evidence, it's a record of character. My hands clenched in my lap as I watched. While I had spent nights at Dad's side, administering IVs, managing feeding tubes, and comforting him through unbearable pain, my sister had turned his suffering into a prop, monetized through social media, trivialized for her own gain. Harrison leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning mine. There's more, he said, tapping the folder stacked neatly beside the laptop. He handed it to me carefully, as if it were fragile, a treasure chest of betrayal and truth intertwined. I opened the folder and froze. Bank statements, money transfers, account details, all in my mother's name. Hundreds of thousands of dollars moved from Dad's accounts to offshore accounts, traced meticulously over 18 months. Every dollar she siphoned contrasted violently with the savings I had poured into his care, the receipts totaling over $73,000 for medications, equipment, and emergency treatments. My hands trembled as I flipped through each page, disbelief and sorrow mingling with a simmering rage. I had given everything, not for recognition, not for inheritance, but because I loved him. Yet here was the stark proof that my mother, the woman who had claimed moral and familial authority, had enriched herself while his child fought to keep him alive. Harrison paused, letting the weight of each revelation settle. Your father was brilliant in this, he said. Every betrayal was anticipated, every misstep documented, every failure recorded. He wanted you to see this, Veronica, to understand not just the actions of your family, but the foresight he employed to protect what mattered most. He trusted your loyalty above all else. He wanted the truth to be undeniable when the time came. The tension in the room was palpable. Each word, each pause, each glance from Harrison made the story heavier, more significant, as though the room itself understood the gravity of what was being revealed. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting my mind run through the countless nights I had spent at Dad's side, the IVs, the feeding tubes, the sleepless nights, the constant worry, every sacrifice I had made, every penny I had spent, every moment I had given, now seemed validated by the stark, damning evidence of my family's betrayal. Jonathan, Prudence, Mom, each of their faces now etched into my memory with clarity and precision, each act of selfishness cataloged by my father with meticulous care. The contrast between my devotion and their greed was undeniable, a cruel yet poetic irony that filled me with both satisfaction and sorrow. Harrison reached for a folder labeled legal documentation and slid it across the table. "There's one more layer, Veronica," he said. "Your father's secondary will, the one signed 2 weeks ago, contains stipulations that hinge on these very actions. The moral clause he included ensures that any beneficiary who acted against his interests through theft, neglect, or abuse would forfeit their inheritance entirely. And we have the evidence, all of it, ready for tomorrow." My breath caught. This was bigger than I had imagined. My father's foresight wasn't just protective. It was strategic. A masterclass in planning, ensuring that loyalty, not entitlement, would be rewarded. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the revelation wash over me. The hours I had spent caring for him, the financial sacrifices, the sleepless nights, all had been noticed, recorded, and preserved. I realized, in that quiet office, that my father's plan had always included me, even if the world had tried to erase my presence, even if my mother had tried to publicly humiliate me, even if my siblings had performed grief as a spectacle. The stage was set. The evidence was irrefutable. The reckoning was imminent. And for the first time since standing outside the cathedral, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The kind that comes from knowing that justice, meticulously prepared, was about to unfold. Harrison leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "Tomorrow," he said, "everything will be revealed, not through confrontation, not through anger, but through truth, evidence, and love. Your father knew who truly cared. And tomorrow, the world will see it too." I nodded, absorbing every word, every pause, every hint of the man who had guided me from beyond the veil of his illness. For 3 years, I had given him everything, expecting nothing in return, and now, finally, the weight of that dedication was about to shift the balance in ways I could barely imagine. The anticipation was almost unbearable, a tension that wrapped around my chest like a vise, and yet in that moment I felt ready. I understood my father's intelligence, his foresight, and the quiet power of patience. The pieces were falling into place, and tomorrow, every act of betrayal, every selfish choice, every act of loyalty would be revealed in stark, undeniable clarity. I left the office that day with a strange mix of emotions, relief, anticipation, satisfaction, and sorrow. The evidence was damning, the stakes higher than ever, and the stage set for a confrontation that would change the course of my family's history forever. I walked to my car slowly, my mind replaying every scene, every revelation, every betrayal, knowing that while today had been about discovery, tomorrow would be about justice. And for the first time in years, I felt the quiet thrill of inevitability. The truth, at last, would emerge victorious. This expanded chapter is over 2,100 words, rich with cinematic detail, suspense, emotional contrast, and anticipation for the will reading, fully immersing the audience in Veronica's discovery and building tension for the next chapter. The conference room was quiet when I arrived, but the quiet wasn't comforting. It was heavy, pregnant with tension, anticipation, and the subtle electricity of inevitability. I had chosen my attire carefully. A black dress I had kept for years. Simple, understated, yet elegant. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was meant to blend, to let the drama unfold around me while I observed, patient and composed. The room was already crowded with my mother, Eleanor, seated imperiously at the head of the table, her posture rigid, face composed but taut with tension. Jonathan slouched in a chair, scrolling through his phone, a picture of detached entitlement, while Prudence filmed herself on her smartphone, narrating the moment for her followers as though the gravitas of the will reading were merely another scene in her social media narrative. The Tribune journalist was present, notebook open, pen poised, ready to document every humiliation, every gasp, every tear. Security guards flanked the room, their stoic presence amplifying the seriousness of the event. And there, at the center of it all, sat Mr. Harrison, calm, collected, the master orchestrator of the day's events, his laptop open and the security monitors flickering with quiet readiness. "Nice of you to finally join us," my mother said, her voice sharp, a mix of irritation and venom aimed at me. "Though I don't know why you bothered." Her words hung in the air like daggers, meant to wound, to intimidate, to assert control. I offered a polite nod, my expression serene, almost disarming in its simplicity. I was the picture of calm, and she could feel it, though she would never admit it. Harrison's eyes met mine for a brief second, a silent communication passing between us. He was the executor, the guardian of my father's last wishes, and I trusted him completely. This was more than a will reading. It was the culmination of years of careful observation, planning, and preparation by my father. A man who had always been smarter than anyone gave him credit for. Before we begin the official reading, Harrison began, his voice even, authoritative, cutting through the room like a knife through silk. "This session is being officially recorded for legal purposes. Everything here will be documented, not just for the court, but to ensure the truth of my client's intentions is undisputed." He gestured for the security guards to ensure all doors were locked. A hush fell over the room. Mom's eyebrows shot up, a flicker of irritation and fear flashing across her otherwise composed expression. Jonathan looked up from his phone, curiosity and a faint unease showing on his face, while Prudence paused her live stream, her fingers frozen on the touchscreen, her eyes wide as though realizing that the performance she had so carefully curated might unravel entirely. Harrison exhaled slowly and began. "The will of Thomas Andrew Hayes, dated 18 days ago, will now be read." A ripple went through the room, a mixture of curiosity, anticipation, and disbelief. 18 days ago. My father had acted in secret, knowing precisely what each member of this family might do, anticipating every misstep, every betrayal, every lie. The first words were deliberate, calculated, delivered with a calm that made the words cut deeper than any shouting could. "To my son, Jonathan Michael Hayes," Harrison read, his voice steady, commanding attention, "I leave the sum of $1, to be paid in quarters, so that he may finally learn the value of money he has never earned." Jonathan's face went pale. His phone clattered to the table, forgotten, as the weight of humiliation settled on him like a lead blanket. He stared at Harrison, disbelief and anger mixing in equal measure. "This is impossible," he stammered, voice rising. You can't do this. This is fraud." Harrison shook his head, calm, almost indulgent in his patience. "Please, Mr. Hayes, allow me to finish." Harrison turned to the next page. "To my daughter, Prudence Ann Hayes, I leave the sum of $1, to be paid in pennies, 1 penny for every time she failed to visit, failed to care, or treated my illness as a prop for her social media and profit." Prudence gasped, her perfectly curated social media persona cracking in real time. Her lips trembled, her hands instinctively covering her face, yet the live stream continued, a futile attempt to control the narrative, to salvage the illusion of composure. "This is absurd," she cried. "I was caring for him in my own way." Harrison's eyes locked on hers. "Documented evidence proves otherwise, Miss Hayes. Every pill, every transaction, every failure of attention has been recorded." "And to my wife, Eleanor Marie Hayes," Harrison continued, his voice now carrying an almost surgical precision, I leave the garden shed on lot 17, fully stocked only with the necessities, as a reminder that every act of neglect, every diversion of funds, and every betrayal has consequences. Mom's face turned ashen, her composure faltered, and for the first time that morning, I saw fear in her eyes. The image of her perfectly tailored authority crumbling in the wake of truth was almost satisfying, not because I gloatingly celebrated her fall, but because justice, long delayed, was finally being administered. Harrison clicked a remote, and the large screen behind him flickered to life. The first clip showed Jonathan, flashlight in hand, rifling through Dad's office at 3 in the morning. Every furtive glance, every hurried movement was documented. The footage was clear, undeniable, and damning. Jonathan tried to look away, but the screen mirrored the reality he had tried so hard to hide. His face drained of color, his composure shattered. Next came Prudence. The camera captured her sliding pills into her oversized purse. Carefully checking that no one was watching, she did not hesitate, did not pause, did not consider her father's suffering. Harrison's narration emphasized each movement, pointing out the meticulous foresight my father had employed to capture proof of this betrayal. He trusted observation over speculation, preparation over emotion, Harrison said softly. I could feel the weight of his words settle in the room, a palpable tension as the truth sank into every corner. Finally, Harrison presented the financial records, transfers to offshore accounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned, all traced back to Mom's name. Eleanor gasped, fumbling with the edge of her papers, her composure slipping further with each passing second. She had spent decades cultivating the appearance of sophistication, control, and moral authority, yet here was irrefutable evidence of her greed. My chest tightened, not from triumph, but from the stark contrast between the love I had shown and the selfishness that had defined their actions. Harrison leaned forward slightly, locking eyes on the room. The moral clause included in this will ensure that any beneficiary who acted against my father's interests through theft, neglect, or abuse forfeits their inheritance. Loyalty, dedication, and genuine care are what this will rewards. He turned toward me briefly, a nod of quiet affirmation. My heart swelled, not with pride, but with quiet satisfaction. This was justice, served not with anger but with meticulous planning, intelligence, and foresight. I sat back, composed, letting the chaos around me unfold. Jonathan was shouting, Prudence was sobbing, Mom's face was the very definition of disbelief and panic. The journalist scribbled furiously, capturing every word, every moment, every exposure of betrayal. Harrison calmly continued, reviewing each piece of evidence, showing timestamps, bank transfers, security footage, and documented neglect. Each revelation landed with a weight that no protest could outweigh, a truth that no performance could undo. And in that moment, as my siblings' arrogance dissolved into despair, as my mother's control crumbled, I realized the most powerful satisfaction was quiet. I did not gloat. I did not need to shout. Justice had been served through truth, through foresight, and through the unwavering dedication my father had recognized and rewarded. The room had become a stage where the drama of greed and betrayal had been exposed, and I, the uninvited heiress, sat calm and collected, a silent testament to the power of loyalty, love, and meticulous planning. I allowed myself a small, private smile, the kind that only comes when patience, devotion, and integrity are finally recognized. For 3 years, I had given everything, not for recognition, not for revenge, but for love. And now, through my father's careful orchestration, the world saw what I had known all along. Loyalty triumphs over entitlement, love outweighs greed, and justice, when prepared with precision, is unstoppable. The moral clause, the secret will, the recorded evidence, all of it ensured that my family could no longer hide behind privilege, performance, or deception. The conference room had fallen into an eerie quiet. My siblings were rendered speechless, my mother frozen, unable to comprehend how the tables had turned so thoroughly. Harrison's voice broke the silence one last time. Veronica Christine Hayes, by every measure, has earned not just the inheritance, but the recognition, the dignity, and the trust your father valued above all else. I remained composed, letting the weight of his words sink into the room. There was no need to celebrate. Justice, as my father had designed it, had been administered perfectly, and that was enough. The day after the will reading felt like stepping into a different world, one both familiar and completely transformed. I arrived at Hayes Construction early, the winter sunlight glinting off the glass fade, catching in the dust motes that danced lazily in the air. I had never seen the building like this, not before, filled with quiet anticipation, whispers of curiosity and eyes that betrayed both respect and relief. Miguel, Dad's longtime foreman, met me at the door, his expression a mixture of pride and excitement. "Boss," he said simply, the single word carrying more weight than all the corporate accolades I had ever earned in my career. My heart skipped. After all the turmoil, after the public humiliations of my mother and siblings, after the revelations of greed and neglect, this was the moment where the truth, the loyalty, and the years of sacrifice finally aligned with recognition. Walking through the office, I was struck by the subtle but profound change in atmosphere. Employees who had once treated me as just Dad's daughter now approached me with deferential nods, careful smiles, and congratulations whispered under breath. Miguel introduced me to a few of the senior project managers, each handshake firm, filled with the mutual understanding that leadership, when earned through loyalty and perseverance, commanded respect naturally. I wasn't just inheriting a business, I was inheriting a culture, a legacy of trust, and a responsibility to steer it in a direction that honored both my father and those who had worked loyally alongside him for decades. Hayes Construction, all of the family's rental properties, the family home, and Dad's classic car collection, everything was mine now. I ran my fingers across the polished wood of Dad's old desk, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and cedar, thinking of the late nights I had spent there, balancing care for Dad with the planning and logistics of his business, while my siblings were chasing empty pursuits. The responsibility was immense, yet empowering, as though every sacrifice I had made had been a quiet rehearsal for this moment of full control and purpose. Meanwhile, the consequences of the moral clause and Dad's meticulous documentation rippled outward like a shockwave. Prudence's social media followers plummeted almost instantly, the illusion of her glamorous, empathetic persona evaporating under the weight of the truth. Jonathan's hedge fund ambitions crumbled. The firm terminated him with cause, citing his misappropriation of funds and ethical breaches documented in the investigation my father had secretly orchestrated. My mother, Eleanor, the woman who had once blocked me from my father's funeral with such cold, theatrical precision, was left with only the garden shed on Lot 17. She lingered there like a ghost of entitlement, her expensive wardrobe and carefully curated poise rendered meaningless against the evidence of her greed and neglect. Watching her attempt to reconcile her loss with the absurdity of her circumstances, forced to live in a shed while I managed the very empire she had attempted to manipulate, was both jarring and strangely cathartic. Amid all of this upheaval, I found a deeper source of closure in the letters, recordings, and personal messages Dad had left me. In his shaky handwriting, his familiar looping cursive conveyed warmth, pride, and subtle humor. The recordings captured his voice, the timbre, the pauses, the inflection, making it feel as though he were sitting beside me again, guiding me through the chaos and offering quiet reassurance. Veronica, one letter began, "You were never about the wealth. You were about the moments, the care, and the courage to stand when others faltered. That is what inheritance really means, not the passing down of money, but of worth, integrity, and love." I held the letter to my chest, the words echoing through me like a balm over the years of exhaustion, sacrifice, and unacknowledged effort. Tears blurred my vision, but they were not tears of defeat or sorrow. They were the culmination of a journey finally validated, a life of devotion finally recognized. With renewed purpose, I stepped fully into my role as the head of Hayes Construction. My first initiative was deeply personal, renovating the children's hospital where Dad had received his own care. Every floor, every wing, every design element was chosen with care, inspired by memories of Dad's time there, the kindness of nurses, the resilience of patients, and the hope I had clung to during his treatments. I worked closely with Miguel and the senior project managers, listening to their insights, valuing their experience, and encouraging their ideas. Leadership, I realized, wasn't about control. It was about collaboration, respect, and guiding those around you toward a shared vision. At the same time, I implemented programs for our rental properties, ones that aligned with both social responsibility and community building. Tenants who volunteered for local initiatives or provided mentorship to young students in need were offered rent credits. Workshops on financial literacy, home maintenance, and career guidance were introduced, empowering tenants to gain skills and confidence. The goal was not simply profit, it was purpose, a chance to transform spaces into tools for growth, echoing my father's legacy of creating not just buildings, but opportunities. Every decision I made was guided by Dad's principles, the lessons embedded in his letters and recordings, and the morality he had demanded in his final will. I established clear standards for ethical conduct across all company operations, ensuring that honesty, integrity, and loyalty were rewarded, while greed and negligence were unmistakably penalized. It was a subtle, almost invisible form of governance, a culture shift born not from fear, but from recognition that the right actions, the right motivations, and the right intentions carried weight beyond immediate gain. Beyond the professional realm, I dedicated time to personal reflection and emotional healing. Each evening, I would sit in the family home, reading Dad's anniversary letters, listening to his recordings, and reviewing the personal messages he had left for birthdays, holidays, and milestones. It was a steady reminder that inheritance was never just about assets. It was about the lessons, the values, and the love passed down through generations. These letters reinforced my own worth, my role not just as an heir, but as a custodian of a legacy, someone entrusted to turn past pain and betrayal into something meaningful and lasting. The public fallout of my family's failures continued to unfold in the weeks that followed. News articles highlighted the stark contrast between my loyalty and my siblings' greed. Prudence lost hundreds of thousands of followers, her influencer career collapsing in real time as brands severed ties, sponsors withdrew, and her audience abandoned the illusion of authenticity she had cultivated. Jonathan's professional reputation became irreparably damaged, his termination widely publicized, with industry commentary dissecting the evidence of misconduct, and my mother, Eleanor, once the matriarch of control and influence, became a cautionary tale, a reminder that power built on deception and selfishness is fleeting. Her only remaining asset, the garden shed, became a symbol of the moral consequences Dad had designed to ensure that only loyalty and care would be rewarded. Through it all, I remained composed. I did not gloat. I did not celebrate the downfall of my family. Instead, I channeled every emotion, pain, betrayal, anger, and heartbreak, into purpose. I transformed the family business into a tool for good, implementing philanthropic projects that reflected the values Dad had instilled: compassion, accountability, and empowerment. Beyond the children's hospital renovation and rental programs, I sponsored local education initiatives, vocational training, and mentorship programs for young women seeking careers in construction and business. Hayes Construction became more than a business. It became a vehicle for social change, a living monument to integrity and dedication. As the weeks turned into months, I also focused on building a personal sense of closure and fulfillment. Visiting the cemetery, I spoke to Dad quietly, recounting progress on the hospital renovation, updates from tenants, and the ways I had implemented his guidance. "They are learning, Dad," I whispered. "The world is seeing what you valued, and I am carrying it forward." I felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that every decision, every act of leadership, every moment of care was aligned with the principles he had taught me. The Hayes family home, now fully in my stewardship, became a hub of strategy, community engagement, and remembrance. The classic cars were maintained, not as luxury trophies, but as symbols of our heritage, displayed in ways that inspired employees and the public alike. Each morning I walked through the offices, greeting staff personally, listening to concerns, celebrating achievements, and ensuring that the culture of accountability and loyalty remained ingrained in every corner of the company. The culmination of all these efforts, renovation projects, rental property programs, community outreach, ethical governance, and personal reflection, served as the ultimate resolution. I had transformed personal betrayal and family greed into a platform for empowerment, justice, and positive change. Pain had been converted into purpose, injustice into action, and loss into legacy. Every decision I made honored Dad's memory, reflected his wisdom, and solidified the truth he had always known: that inheritance is not merely wealth, but the trust, responsibility, and love we carry forward. Sitting in the study one evening, I opened the box Dad had left me, containing letters for the next 10 years, birthdays, holidays, and personal milestones. Reading them, listening to his voice in recordings, I felt the enduring presence of his guidance. "Veronica," one letter read, "your worth is never measured by money, but by care, courage, and loyalty. You have proven yourself in ways others could not. Carry it forward." I smiled, finally understanding that the real victory had never been financial, but moral, ethical, and emotional. I was not just an heiress. I was a custodian of a legacy built on love, integrity, and foresight. The quiet moments after the whirlwind of revelations, confrontations, and the upheaval of my family's empire were unlike anything I had ever experienced. For weeks, I had moved through the world as though in slow motion, processing each shocking revelation from Dad's trust and moral clause, each public humiliation of my mother and siblings, and the startling realization that love and loyalty were far more valuable than wealth, prestige, or appearances. I often found myself reflecting on the subtle lessons embedded in every betrayal I had witnessed: the greed of my mother, the entitlement of Jonathan, the performative self-interest of prudence. It all crystallized into a single profound truth. Inheritance is not just what you receive, it is what you choose to give, what you nurture, and how you honor those values that define you. Dad had spent his final years not just building a business, but carefully constructing a moral framework, a way to ensure that the wealth and influence he had amassed would reward devotion, integrity, and genuine care. And as I stood at the threshold of that inheritance, I understood that my role was not to squander it or flaunt it, but to channel it into purpose, service, and lasting change. Walking through the halls of Hayes Construction, I felt the full weight of that responsibility and the exhilaration of ownership. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the polished oak floors, the strategic charts lining the walls, and the bustling energy of employees who now looked at me with something more than recognition. They looked at me with trust. Trust, I realized, was the ultimate inheritance my father had given me, far more valuable than the concrete, steel, or money that made up the business. Miguel greeted me with his characteristic nod and grin. "Everything's ready for your inspection today," he said. "The hospital renovation team is waiting, the rental program coordinators are lined up, and the tenants have already started volunteering for the mentoring program." I smiled, feeling a deep, serene satisfaction, realizing that every step I took was not just a continuation of Dad's legacy, but a personal victory over the trials I had endured. I slipped into my father's office, the familiar scent of leather and cedar wrapping around me like a warm embrace. His desk, polished to perfection, still held the framed photographs of milestones, celebrations, and everyday moments, him teaching me to ride a bike, the day we broke ground on our first major construction site, family holidays at the coast. I traced my fingers over the edge of the desk, remembering the countless nights I had spent here, balancing my career ambitions with caregiving, ensuring that every detail of his empire continued to function while my siblings remained detached, lost in their self-interest. Now, all of that effort had culminated in a space where I was not just an observer, not just a participant, but the orchestrator of a legacy grounded in love, integrity, and justice. Stepping out of the office, I felt the thrill of empowerment ripple through me. I walked with confidence down the wide corridors, greeting each employee personally, acknowledging their dedication, and encouraging them to see themselves as part of a larger mission, one built not on fear but on collaboration, accountability, and shared purpose. Each smile, each nod, reinforced the idea that true leadership is not about commanding from above, but guiding from within, cultivating a culture where honesty, loyalty, and hard work are rewarded naturally, without the need for threats or artificial hierarchy. By midday, I climbed into the classic 1967 Mustang Dad had left me, the car gleaming in the sunlight, its engine purring like a contented beast, ready for the open road. Driving through the city, I felt a deep sense of liberation and control. Each turn, each acceleration, was a reminder that I was now steering my own course, not only in business, but in life. I visited our rental properties, stopping to talk with tenants, learning their stories, offering encouragement, and watching their faces light up when I spoke about programs that allowed them to earn rent credits through community service. The sense of empowerment I experienced in these moments was unmatched by any corporate achievement I had ever pursued. This was real impact. This was legacy in motion. The Children's Hospital renovation project became my personal mission, a way to honor Dad's memory while giving back to the community that had once supported him. I walked through the halls of the nearly completed facility, imagining the patient's laughter, the doctor's dedication, the family's gratitude. Each design decision, the bright murals, the spacious play areas, the soothing lighting in patient rooms, was intended to inspire hope and comfort. I met with project managers and nurses, listening to their insights and learning from their experiences, recognizing that leadership, at its best, is a dialogue, a partnership, a shared vision realized through mutual respect. As the weeks passed, I noticed subtle but profound changes in the broader community. News outlets highlighted the contrast between my loyalty and the selfishness of my family, shining a light on the importance of ethics and integrity in both personal and professional spheres. Prudence's influencer career faltered spectacularly. Her followers dwindled as the truth of her actions became undeniable. Jonathan's professional network disintegrated, his ethical lapses exposed and documented. My mother, Eleanor, who had once tried to control perception and command respect through fear and manipulation, became a cautionary tale, a symbol of the consequences of prioritizing greed over love. Her only remaining possession, the small garden shed on Lot 17, stood as a monument to moral failure, a daily reminder of the cost of selfishness and dishonesty. Amid the external triumphs, I devoted myself to internal growth and reflection. Evenings in the family home became sacred. I would sit quietly, listening to Dad's recordings, reading his letters and absorbing the wisdom he had left behind. Each word, each pause, each nuance of his voice reminded me that inheritance is not simply monetary, it is a responsibility, a moral compass, and a guide to action. His writings emphasized courage, empathy, and commitment to doing what is right, even when it is difficult, unpopular, or inconvenient. In those moments, I felt his presence beside me, steadying my heart, affirming my choices, and reminding me that the true victory was not in wealth or recognition, but in living according to the values he had instilled. The moral of this journey, which I came to understand deeply, is that loyalty and love are the most powerful currencies in life. While my siblings had chased superficial status, material gain, and fleeting admiration, I had invested in care, consistency, and integrity. Dad's foresight, codified in his trust and moral clause, was a testament to the enduring value of virtue over greed. I realized, profoundly, that what we choose to give, to nurture, to protect, to honor, is the true inheritance we leave behind. The wealth we amass, the power we gain, and the influence we wield are secondary to the character and legacy we cultivate through our actions, decisions, and dedication to those who matter most. In my final reflection, I understood that empowerment is not merely the exercise of authority, but the transformation of adversity into purpose. I had turned betrayal into clarity, heartbreak into compassion, and injustice into a platform for meaningful change. Every project, every tenant program, every philanthropic initiative was infused with intention, guided by lessons of empathy, fairness, and moral courage. As I drove the Mustang across the city to oversee new projects, my heart swelled with pride, not for personal glory, but for the tangible, positive impact rippling through the community. And in those moments of stillness, I felt an abiding sense of victory. Not the shallow victory of financial gain, but the profound triumph of living in alignment with the values that truly matter: loyalty, perseverance, integrity, and love. Dad's experiment, his careful orchestration of events, and his moral vision had succeeded beyond measure. I was not merely an heiress. I was a custodian of a legacy, a living testament to the power of virtue, and a beacon for others navigating the complicated interplay of family, responsibility, and morality. As I settled back into my office that evening, watching the city lights flicker through the windows, I allowed myself a quiet smile. The journey had been harrowing, the betrayals sharp and painful, yet every step had led to clarity, justice, and empowerment. I knew without doubt that the path I had walked, though lonely at times, exhausting, and fraught with moral complexity, was the path Dad had intended me to follow. Loyalty had won, perseverance had been rewarded, and integrity had proven more enduring than wealth alone. To anyone witnessing this story, whether through the lens of family, business, or personal challenge, I hope it serves as a reminder. True inheritance is never merely financial. It is measured in love, dedication, and the choices we make to nurture, protect, and empower those around us. And for those moments when life tests your patience, integrity, and courage, remember this: loyalty, when combined with unwavering dedication to what is right, will always triumph. If you were inspired by my journey, I invite you to take this lesson to heart. Hit like, share this story, and leave a comment reflecting on the values that guide your life. Because in the end, the world may try to reward greed, but loyalty, love, and integrity endure far beyond fleeting fortune or recognition.